Hey, everybody, welcome to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Continuing our series here on the Browns quarterback battle, doing podcasts on all four of the quarterbacks, how they can win the job, what it might look like if they win the job, all of those things as we get ready for training camp here at the end of July. So we did a Joe Flacco pod already. We'll have a Dylan Gabriel pod coming your way, a Shedeur Sanders pod coming your way. So now let's do Kenny Pickett. And of course, we're talking about this as far as week one starters go. So we're not just talking about starting at some point, we're starting week one. So Mary Kay, I think it's fair to say that we've sort of looked at this as Kenny Pickett in the Browns' eyes being the favorite to be the week one starter. Did you come out of the offseason program feeling any differently about kind of where Kenny Pickett stands in this whole competition?
I kind of did, Dan. I really kind of did. I went into it believing that Kenny Pickett was the presumptive week one starter because that's what the Browns had been kind of intimating. And when they went out at the start of the league year, they aggressively pursued Kenny right away and they traded for him. And Joe was a little bit of an afterthought. He was signed a month into free agency. He had no idea it was coming. He was surprised. And if they had designs on him as their week one starter, I don't know if they would have been that casual about letting him float around out there. So I actually do feel a little bit different coming out of spring practices, meaning OTAs and mandatory minicamp, than I did heading in. And I think that is because I believe that this is like child's play for Joe Flacco. He knows this offense like the back of his hand. He's got a head start. The coaches know him. He excels in this kind of an offense. The play action, this West Coast scheme that they're doing, he understands the terminology. He's got it down already. And Kenny Pickett has to come up the learning curve. He's learning a lot of things about this offense. He's learning how to operate under center. He's learning the terminology. He's learning how they want him to do things. And it's not second nature yet. And I think he's going to get it. And I still think there is a very, very, very good chance that he will start week one. But I also think that there's a very, very good chance that Joe Flacco now will start week one. And I did not feel that way heading into spring ball. But when I watched them operate, when I heard them talk, when I heard the coaches talk about them, I think Joe brought himself up a little bit in the competition, not by all of the things that he did on a down for down basis, because he didn't have to do that much. But even just in the few reps that he was given, you can just see the lights are so on for him. He knows exactly what he's doing in this scheme. And it's incumbent upon Kenny Pickett to prove that he can be better than Joe Flacco.
So I'm glad you said that, because I've been wondering, obviously we've heard the coaches talk about it, and we've heard the players talk about Joe Flacco too, right? Just this idea of how much trust they have in him. And Joel Bitonio was obviously happy to have him back. We heard Myles Garrett indicate that maybe they had told him bringing Joe Flacco back was part of the plan. So I think that's really interesting. And a part of me has wondered, is this going to play out where ultimately we're going to be sitting here watching Kenny Pickett and Dylan Gabriel compete to be the backup, essentially, more than Kenny Pickett and Joe Flacco competing to be the starter, because there's so much trust in Joe, and there's so much, and the locker room loves Joe. And I do think some of that matters in all of this. So could that work against Kenny Pickett in all of this? This idea of not only do you have to sell a fan base on Kenny Pickett over Joe Flacco, that's one thing, but you had to sell a locker room on Kenny Pickett over Joe Flacco too. And we know how these guys in that locker room feel about Joe Flacco.
Absolutely 100%. And it would probably be a lot easier to go from Joe Flacco to Kenny Pickett than to have to go from Kenny Pickett to Joe Flacco, right? If Kenny Pickett goes out there and struggles and Joe Flacco is on the sidelines or on the bench, that's going to be very difficult to navigate. So I almost think that it would be better for the Browns to start Joe Flacco, see how it goes. And if he is the Joe Flacco of 2023, where he is delivering missiles down the field and making Jerry Jeudy look like a Pro Bowler and getting the ball to David Njoku and throwing touchdown passes, then you keep him in there and you let it roll. And in the event that he's throwing interceptions and it's not going well, then you just have the natural transition to go to Kenny Pickett, and people aren't going to be clamoring for Joe in that situation. So I just think that it might be more prudent to start with Joe, see what he's got. As you mentioned, the players believe in him, they love him. There are drawbacks to having Joe start. We've talked about those things. You can't do all the movement stuff with him because he can't move that well anymore. So there are things about him that would limit you to a degree. But I just think that it's going to be up to Kenny to go out there and prove that he knows this offense as well as Joe, that he can operate the play action as well as Joe does, that he can make some explosives. I mean, you really want to be able to stretch a defense. You don't want to have a thoroughbred receiver like Jerry Jeudy and not be able to use him. You want to be able to get that ball down the field, not just to him, but to some of your other guys, to Cedric Tillman, even to Jamari's Thrash this year, and to those tight ends. So Kenny's got to show that he can do all of those kinds of things. The thing about Kenny that you're going to like if you have him in there is that he is athletic and mobile, and you don't have that with Joe. So you can do more things with Kenny, or at least more things in the mobility movement space than you can with Joe, just in terms of keepers and bootlegs and all those different kinds of things that you can do that an athlete running the ball, have him occasionally running the ball. So I just think it just brings a different dimension. And this is where you've got Tommy Rees that can bring some new eyes to that situation for a Kenny Pickett. And you've got Bill Musgrave that can bring some a new vibe to the offense for some things that Kenny Pickett can do. So it's just sort of the stationary guy versus the mobile guy between those two, and which way do you want to spin it?
So and you touched on a little bit of this, but what happens with Kenny Pickett in your eyes that would change your mind when we get out there in training camp and we're watching, and you come away, let's say we come away from those Philly practices, we're doing our stand-up video or we're doing our podcast on that Thursday night after those Philly practices, and you're saying, you know what, Kenny Pickett's the guy. He's the starter. What happens in those few weeks in your mind to kind of make that happen?
Well, here's the thing that's going to be hard about evaluating Kenny Pickett through these training camp practices is the fact that it doesn't necessarily lend itself to off-schedule stuff and mobility and athleticism. It's set up, or at least it has been to this point, for that drop-back play-action game that Joe excels in. And so Kenny hasn't had a time to shine yet. And Kenny is also, like Dylan, has taken on the brunt. They've taken on water of trying to figure out what works in this offense and what doesn't. So Kenny hasn't always looked amazing yet. There have been times where you walk out of that practice and you think, my goodness, Shedeur looked better than Kenny and Shedeur looked better than Dylan. It's just there are different reasons for that. But what I would see in Kenny that would make me say he can be the guy is that somehow, some way, he gets to use his movement skills and his mobility skills, and he shines in throwing on the run and in pulling it in and running a little bit and running the bootlegs and the keepers and those kinds of things. If I can see him play to his strengths, then I'm going to be able to envision it. Right now it's hard. We're not getting that. And some of that might not really come until you're in a game and you're able to improvise a little bit and run around and have the receivers doing scramble drills and things like that. You just might not get as much of that as you want in a controlled 11 on 11 drill. It just might not be there. So I think it's going to have to be in 2-minute drill, in more scrimmagey type vibes, in some of the games where he's going to probably have to play some for us to be able to see it.
How much do you think it matters, the idea of selling Kenny Pickett, or, kind of selling that idea of Kenny Pickett over Joe Flacco? Because I don't know how much organizationally they care necessarily about. I mean, I'm just thinking back to last year. I think Deshaun was, I don't know. I thought he was fairly popular going into last year as the starter. There wasn't much controversy about him being the starter last year. But then, of course, when the season starts and he's struggling, you start getting the calls for Jameis Winston. And Kevin stood by Deshaun for a long time until he got hurt, really, and never made what would have been the popular move to go to Jameis Winston. So I don't think that Kevin, even go back to Baker, right? Like when Baker was struggling and people were saying, why don't you make a switch here for a game or two? Kevin was stubborn and didn't do it. So I guess I don't know how much he or the organization actually cares about that part of it. But do you think that matters, the idea of being able to sell Kenny Pickett to a fan base and more importantly, the locker room?
I don't think so. I don't think those guys operate like that. I really don't. I think they do a good job of blocking out the outside noise. And I think they really put on those blinders and they try to figure out who is going to give us the best chance to win? Who can we game plan around and get the most out of him so that we have an effective game plan and that we can execute it? And in terms of Kenny Pickett, that would mean running the ball a fair amount. It would mean the movement that we're talking about. He's going to have to stretch it out a little bit more than he has in the past. I thought the clamps were on him a little bit when he was in Pittsburgh under Matt Canada. It was dysfunctional. It didn't work out well. I think he's got more options here that he's going to feel good about. I think he is going to start to heat up a little bit, probably with Jerry Jeudy and Dave Njoku. That's another thing that will make me think he can do it. And that is, are you feeding those guys? And are they feeling good about themselves? And are they catching the ball? And are they functioning really well and lighting it up? I think he needs to make a few more explosive plays than we've seen him make in the past.
Well, and that's something Joe Flacco is really good at is I know my guys and I'm going to make sure they're getting the ball. I should say, now that I'm thinking back to it, even the Deshaun that spring where they let Joe Flacco go. People obviously were not happy about that. So they stood by Deshaun and continued to make that. So I don't know that they really care that much about what people think on the outside. So that'll help them in this decision. So let's say Kenny Pickett wins the job. Let's say he's that week one starter. But what does a season of Kenny Pickett starting look like for the Browns? I mean, you've kind of thrown out the idea of maybe he could be their version of a Sam Darnold, something like that. Do you think he has that in him?
Well, that remains to be seen. It remains to be seen because even in Philadelphia last year, he was basically benched at the end of the season for Tanner McKee. And they decided to keep Tanner McKee and trade Kenny Pickett to the Cleveland Browns. That is the best organization in football right now. And if they were willing to part with Kenny Pickett, it sends up a red flag in my mind. Why would they do that? So I have to see it. I want to see what he's got. He's going to need to prove it to me and to pretty much everyone else that he can live up to or come close to his first round status. Let's not forget, he was a first round pick of the Pittsburgh Steelers, the number 20 overall pick. Once again, he came out of a dysfunctional situation. So I think he deserves a little bit of a pass for that. But in terms of what happened to him last year, I think he got some really good coaching. And I'm anxious to see what can he do with what he learned from Kellen Moore. And sometimes you learn a lot just by sitting back and watching and just by letting Jalen Hurts' ability rub off on you a little bit. And just by osmosis, you kind of learn some things. So I am very anxious to see what he's able to do. But you are going to have to play fast and furious, and you've got to be able to run this offense and not be thinking about it. And that's what I wonder when he talks about, oh, I'm just getting to know the terminology and, I'm honing my pocket presence and play action, all those kinds of things. Then you can't be learning on the job. This is way, way too important in the beginning of the season. If he's not ready to go out there and operate at a very, very, very high level, then that's not going to cut it. He's got to be ready to go. And maybe this break in between, maybe it will all crystallize for him and it will all sink in. And as he moves through training camp, we will see the lights just really come on. That's what they're going to need to see. We're going to have to see it. We did not see it in spring ball. You didn't see it. I didn't see it. If we are saying that we did, we're kidding ourselves. We didn't see him pop. He needs to pop in training camp.
Yeah, and I think the other hope is maybe this offense is tailored a little more towards kind of what he does well. Because, you've mentioned the Matt Canada thing. That was just a mess in Pittsburgh when they stuck with him for way too long. I mean, we were sitting in that stadium hearing the fire Matt Canada chants while they were winning a football game. So obviously there's a lot of angst over that. And in Philly last year, I think it's probably I would imagine it's challenging to be the backup quarterback in Philly, in part because that offense is built around Jalen Hurts, and he's just a different. I mean, you're talking about a guy who can bench a million or squat 1,000,000 pounds like he is. It's just a different sort of offense, and I know that there's going to be elements of what the Browns are doing and things, and obviously they ran the ball, big personnel, two really good receivers, but I don't know. I think it's got to be hard to come in and run an offense that's kind of focused around Jalen Hurts and what he does well, because Jalen Hurts is a little bit of a funky quarterback. So I'm making excuses for Kenny Pickett here, I guess. But that's the hope, is that those excuses are like legitimate, and you can put him in this offense where, okay, now it's this heavy play action. I've joked on here before that I saw him make a play at the Senior Bowl where he ran this play action pass through a beautiful ball, and I thought, oh, Kevin Stefanski probably fell in love with him in that moment. Maybe that's it. I mean, maybe just being in an offense that's a little more suited to him and tailored to him will make him a better quarterback than what we've seen.
That and the fact that it is also a very quarterback friendly offense, the one that they are going back to. It usually brings out the best in that Kenny Pickett level of quarterback. You can plug Case Keenum into this particular offense and he looks amazing. It is that kind of an offense. It's designed for high percentage plays, for getting the ball into the hands of your playmakers, for managing the game, taking some well placed shots and making some good decisions. But it's a little bit more of a lower risk scheme. There's running the ball. I mean, there's a lot of different things. And once again, then you add in his movement skills where you can get him out in space a little bit, and he might just flourish in this scheme. So anxious to see what he can do, but not expecting him to really jump off the page even in those first couple of weeks of training camp yet. I think it might take a little while before he can seize the moment.
And it's going to be very interesting in those Philly practices. Obviously, that's a team that knows him well. So it'll be interesting to see him kind of go up against that defense again and sort of what he's facing against those guys. And I think we've said it before. I think we'll have an idea of kind of where things stand once we get to Philadelphia. And then after we watch those two practices, we'll be able to say pretty definitively where this quarterback competition is going. Okay, a full series. We're doing all four quarterbacks. Like I said, we already did Flacco. That was Kenny Pickett with a lot of Joe Flacco mixed in. But what are you going to do? The people love Joe Flacco. And we'll do a pod on Dylan Gabriel and, of course, Shedeur Sanders as well. Those are all coming up on the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Get subscribed on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Cleveland Browns or cleveland.com/Browns is where you can become a Football Insider subscriber. It's the blue banner at the top of the page. Our YouTube is Cleveland Browns on cleveland.com. Full pods, videos, and of course, when we get to training camp, we'll have a ton of videos and highlights going up there. So just get subscribed to our YouTube channel now. Mary Kay, I will talk to you later.
Sounds great.